September 5th, 1552, northern Hungary, Eger Castle. Captain István Dobó stands alone on the eastern rampart as the sun bleeds into the horizon. He's 50 years old, grey threading through his beard, hands scarred from 3 decades of frontier warfare. In his right hand, he holds a letter. The wax seal of King Ferdinand thus broken. The message inside 3 lines, clear, unambiguous. Abandon the fortress. Retreat north. Preserve your men for battles that can be won. Dobó reads it again, though he's already memorized every word. Behind him, the castle courtyard bustles with evening activity. Soldiers cleaning muskets, women preparing dinner in the kitchens, children playing near the well, their laughter echoing off stone walls that have stood for 200 years. Normal life, ordinary life, life that's about to end. Dobó folds the letter carefully, walks to a brazier burning near the guard post, and drops it into the flames. He watches the parchment curl and blacken, the royal seal melting into ash. He's just refused a direct order from his king. In any army, that's treason. But Dobó isn't thinking about courts-martial or consequences. He's thinking about a report that arrived 3 days ago from his scouts in the south. An Ottoman army. Not a raiding party, not a skirmishing force. An army, 40,000 men, maybe more, marching north, coming here. The arithmetic is simple and terrifying. Eger's garrison, 800 soldiers. The force coming to destroy them, 40,000. That's a ratio of 50 to 1. In military terms, it's not a battle, it's an execution. But Dobó has spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years stockpiling gunpowder, reinforcing walls, training his men in tactics that conventional wisdom says won't work. 3 years waiting for a battle everyone told him would never come. It's coming now. Before we go further into this story, I need to ask you something. If you appreciate deep historical narratives like this, real people facing impossible decisions, battles that change the course of empires, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what historical siege or battle you want covered next. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more people who care about history that matters. And trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends, because what happened at Eger in the autumn of 1552 defies everything we think we know about warfare, odds, and human courage. A garrison of 800 professional soldiers, 200 civilians, men, women, children, refugees with nowhere else to run, facing the most powerful military machine on planet Earth. They have 3 months of food if they ration carefully. 42 cannons, most of them outdated, some cracked from previous use. Walls that look impressive but haven't been tested in a real siege for 2 generations. Limited gunpowder. No reinforcements coming, no rescue. What they do have is István Dobó, and in 3 weeks, that's going to make all the difference. Dobó calls his officers together that night in the castle's war room. Lieutenant Ferenc Zoltai arrives first. He's 19 years old, the son of a Budapest merchant, barely old enough to grow a full beard. Then comes Captain Gergely Bornemisa, the garrison's second in command. He's a minor nobleman, educated, literate, keeps detailed journals. Behind them, 6 more officers file in. Cavalry commanders, artillery specialists, veteran soldiers who've served on the frontier their entire lives. Dobó doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He unrolls a map across the table, weights down the corners with daggers, and tells them the truth. An Ottoman army left Buda 4 days ago. Our scouts estimate 40,000 troops, including janissaries and the Sultan's siege train. They're moving north through the Matra foothills. At their current pace, they'll reach Eger in 5 days, maybe 6. He pauses, lets that sink in. I've received orders from the king to evacuate, to pull back to the Habsburg territories and preserve our forces. The room goes silent. Zoltai's face goes pale. Bornemisa leans forward, studying the map. One of the older captains speaks up. And what are your orders to us, Commander? Dobó looks up from the map, makes eye contact with each man in turn. We're not evacuating. We're staying. We're going to hold this fortress against 40,000 men, and we're going to make them bleed for every inch they try to take. More silence. Then Bornemisa asks the question everyone's thinking. Can it be done? Dobo doesn't hesitate. I don't know, but I know what happens if we run. Every fortress we abandon makes the next one harder to defend. Every mile we retreat brings the Ottomans closer to Vienna, to the German states, to the heart of Europe. Someone has to draw a line. Someone has to stand and fight, even when the odds say it's impossible. I'm drawing that line here. He straightens up, crosses his arms. Anyone who wants to leave can do so right now. No shame, no judgment. Take your men, ride north, and I'll write in my report that you followed the king's orders. But I'm staying. This castle stands or I die. Zoltai swallows hard, then speaks, his voice cracking slightly. I'll stay. Bonemisa nods. As will I. One by one, every officer in the room commits, not because they think they can win, but because someone has to try. Over the next 5 days, Eger transforms into a fortress, preparing for Armageddon. To understand what Dobo was preparing for, you need to understand what the Ottoman Empire had become by 1552. This wasn't some medieval kingdom fighting with swords and shields. This was the most advanced, most disciplined, most terrifyingly effective military power on the planet. The empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf, from the deserts of Arabia to the Danube River. It encompassed 3 continents, dozens of cultures, millions of subjects, and at its head sat Sultan Suleiman I, called the Magnificent in Europe, called the Lawgiver in the Ottoman domains. The titles weren't propaganda. They were accurate. Suleiman had been on the throne for 32 years. In that time, he hadn't stopped conquering. 1521, Belgrade fell, the fortress that guarded the gateway to Hungary, taken after a 3-week siege. The defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, surrendered when Ottoman miners collapsed an entire section of wall. 1522, Rhodes fell. The Knights Hospitaller had held that island fortress for 200 years. They were the best defensive fighters in Europe, professional warriors sworn to fight to the death. They lasted 6 months against Suleiman's siege. When they finally negotiated surrender, they'd lost 5,000 men. The Ottomans had lost 50,000. Suleiman took the island anyway. 1526, Mohacs. The Kingdom of Hungary met the Ottoman army in open battle. 20,000 Hungarian soldiers, cavalry and infantry, the best troops the kingdom could muster. They lasted 2 hours. The Ottomans killed nearly every single one of them. King Louis II tried to flee the battlefield, fell from his horse crossing a river, and drowned in his own armor. The Kingdom of Hungary effectively died that day. 1541, Buda fell. The capital of Hungary, the city where Hungarian kings had been crowned for centuries, occupied, converted into an Ottoman provincial capital. The country split into 3 pieces: Ottoman-controlled south, Habsburg-controlled west, and a narrow, vulnerable strip of independent Hungarian territory in between. Eger sat in that strip, a fortress town controlling the road north. If Eger fell, the Ottomans would have a clear path to the mining regions of Upper Hungary, regions that produced the gold and silver that funded Habsburg resistance. If Eger fell, Vienna would be next. And if Vienna fell, there was nothing stopping Ottoman expansion into Germany, Poland, the rest of Christian Europe. No pressure. The Ottoman military system in the 16th century was fundamentally different from anything Europe had developed, explains Dr. Gabor Agustin, professor of history at Georgetown University and one of the world's leading experts on Ottoman military history. While European armies were still largely feudal levies, men who showed up when their lord called and went home after the campaign, the Ottomans had created a professional standing army. Soldiers who trained year-round, who fought as units, not individuals, who had developed tactics and technologies that made them nearly unstoppable. The Ottoman siege train was legendary. Their cannons were the largest in the world, cast in bronze by master craftsmen in Constantinople, inscribed with verses from the Quran, capable of firing stone projectiles weighing 300 pounds through fortress walls that had stood for centuries. They had engineers who could build pontoon bridges across rivers in hours, dig mining tunnels under fortifications, construct siege towers that rose higher than church steeples. Their cavalry was arguably the finest in the world. Sipahi riders, equipped with composite bows that could fire arrows 200 yards, with lethal accuracy, wearing layered armor, trained from childhood in mounted combat. They could fire at full gallop, wheel in perfect formation, and hit targets European knights couldn't even see. And then there were the Janissaries. The Janissaries were the nightmare that Europe whispered about. They were created through a system called Devshirme, the blood tax. Ottoman officials would travel through conquered Christian territories in the Balkans, selecting boys, usually between ages 7 and 10, from their families. The boys would be taken to Constantinople, converted to Islam, and entered into a training program that was brutal by design. They learned to fight, to shoot, to endure pain without flinching. They were beaten for showing weakness, starved to teach discipline, drilled until obedience became reflex. They were forbidden to marry, forbidden to own property, forbidden any loyalty except to the Sultan. By the time they were 16, they weren't boys anymore. They were weapons. They wore distinctive uniforms, long robes, tall white felt hats, curved scimitars at their belts. They carried matchlock muskets and knew how to use them with devastating effectiveness. They moved in formation, fought in silence, showed no mercy. The Janissaries were the first modern standing infantry in Europe, says Dr. Caroline Finkel, historian and author of Osman's Dream, The History of the Ottoman Empire. They were professionals in an age of amateurs. A European knight might be individually brave and skilled, but he was one man fighting for personal honor. A Janissary was part of a military machine, a unit that functioned with terrifying efficiency. By 1552, there were roughly 40,000 Janissaries in the entire Ottoman military. The commander marching toward Eger Ali Pasha brought 10,000 of them. The Ottomans didn't just attack fortresses randomly. They had a system, a formula refined over centuries of conquest. Step 1. Complete encirclement. Cut off all roads, all supply lines. No food gets in. No messengers get out. The fortress is alone. The psychological impact is immediate. No rescue is coming. Step 2. Bombardment. Position the heavy cannons just beyond the range of the fortress's defensive guns. Fire day and night. The goal isn't necessarily to breach the walls immediately. It's to crack morale, to make the defenders understand that resistance is futile, that the walls they're hiding behind will eventually crumble, that it's only a matter of time. Step 3. Mining. While the cannons pound from outside, engineers dig tunnels toward the foundation. They shore up the tunnels with timber beams, excavate chambers beneath the walls, pack them with gunpowder, light the fuse, and bring entire sections of fortification crashing down. Send in the Janissaries. Wave after wave. Climb over your own dead if necessary. The defenders are exhausted from weeks of bombardment, demoralized, running low on ammunition. Overwhelm them. Step 5. Occupation or extermination, depending on how long the city resisted. It worked. It always worked. In 1543, the Ottomans besieged Székesfehérvár, the ancient coronation city of Hungarian kings. The garrison held for 17 days. When the walls fell, every single defender was executed. Their heads were mounted on pikes as a warning. In 1544, Visegrad, 8 days, same result. In 1548 Temesvar. The siege lasted a month. When it was over, the Ottoman commander had the Hungarian officers skinned alive. Their skins were stuffed with straw and displayed as trophies. The message was clear: surrender early, live in slavery, resist, and suffer beyond imagination. Eger knew the message. Eger chose to resist anyway. István Dobó was born in 1502 in the village of Ruska, in the Carpathian foothills of eastern Hungary. He wasn't nobility. His father was a minor landholder, a man who owned a few fields, a stone house, some livestock. Nothing more. Dobó grew up working the land, learning to ride, learning to shoot, learning the skills every Hungarian boy learned, because the frontier was always dangerous. When he was 16, Ottoman raiders swept through Ruska. They came at night, professional slave takers looking for goods and captives to sell in the markets of Constantinople. They burned homes, killed anyone who resisted, dragged villagers away in chains. Dobó's father grabbed a sword and ran into the street to defend his home. He killed one raider before a scimitar took his head off. Dobó and his younger brother hid in a root cellar while their house burned above them. They survived. Their father didn't. Their home didn't. Dobo walked to the nearest garrison town the next morning and enlisted. He was 17 years old, half-starved, and filled with the kind of cold, focused fury that doesn't fade. Dobo was shaped by loss, says Dr. Katalin Peter, professor of Hungarian history at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. He knew what the Ottomans did to the people they conquered. He'd seen it. He'd lived it. That made him different from nobles who fought for honor or glory. Dobo fought because he understood the stakes on a visceral, personal level. He rose through the ranks, not through family connections, but through sheer competence. He learned tactics by studying battles, by reading Roman military manuals, by making mistakes and surviving them. He learned how to lead men by earning their respect, not demanding it. By his mid-30s, Dobo was a captain in the Hungarian border forces, the Vévári, the frontier soldiers who held the line against constant Ottoman incursions. It was brutal, grinding work, skirmishes in the hills, night raids, ambushes, the kind of warfare where survival was measured in days, not years. Dobo was good at it. In 1549, King Ferdinand I needed someone to command the garrison at Eger Castle. The previous commander had died of fever. Most officers saw Eger as a dead-end posting, isolated, underfunded, strategically vulnerable. Dobo saw it as essential. He accepted the assignment immediately. Dobo arrived at Eger in the spring of 1549 and immediately started preparing for a siege no one thought would come. He reinforced the walls with earthwork ramparts, widening them to absorb cannon fire. Stone walls crack under bombardment. Earth absorbs the impact. He stockpiled grain, gunpowder, cannonballs. He drilled the garrison relentlessly, not just in shooting, but in close-quarters combat, in how to hold a breach, in how to fight when everything goes to hell. He recruited local men as militia. He organized the civilians, teaching them how to carry ammunition, how to put out fires, how to stay calm when the world is exploding around them. His officers thought he was paranoid. He was preparing. Then in August 1552 the news came. Buda had reinforced its Ottoman garrison. Suleiman had sent a massive army north under Ali Pasha and Kara Ahmed Pasha. Their target, Eger. The Hungarian High Command sent Dobo new orders. Evacuate the castle. Pull back to safer territory. Don't waste men defending a position that can't be held. Dobo read the orders alone in his command chamber, stared at the words for a long time, then burned the letter. Dobo understood something the High Command didn't, says Dr. Agerston. Every fortress they abandoned made the next one harder to defend. If you keep retreating, eventually you run out of ground. Somebody had to stop running. He called his officers together and told them the truth. We've been ordered to evacuate. I'm refusing the order. Anyone who wants to leave can do so now with no shame. But I'm staying. This castle stands or I die in its rubble. Every single officer stayed. Dobo made a promise to the 800 soldiers and 200 civilians sheltering in Eger's walls. I won't lie to you. The odds are against us. The Ottomans are stronger, better armed, better trained. They have 40,000 men. We have 2,000 souls, half of them not soldiers. But we have these walls. We have each other. And we have something they don't, a reason to fight that goes beyond orders. This is our land. They'll have to bury us under it. The civilians listened. Some wept, some prayed. None of them left. Eger too. The people who refused to run by late August 1552, the roads leading to Eger were clogged with refugees. They came from villages to the south, places with names like Mezőkövesd and Kapolna, settlements the Ottoman vanguard had already reached. Smoke rose from the horizon every day. At night, you could see the glow of burning homes. The refugees arrived with whatever they could carry. Wagons piled with grain sacks and family heirlooms. Children clutching dolls. Old men leaning on walking sticks, eyes blank with shock. Eger opened its gates and let them in. Among the refugees was a woman named Eva Szécsi. She was 34 years old, the widow of a Hungarian cavalry officer who had died at the Battle of Mohács 26 years earlier. She'd raised their son, Mihály, alone, running a small estate outside Mezőkövesd. She was educated, literate, and had a reputation for being stubborn as iron, When Ottoman scouts appeared on her land, her neighbors urged her to flee north to the safer Habsburg territories. Eva refused. "If I run," she told her son, "where does it stop? How many times do we abandon our homes before we decide to defend them?" She loaded her wagon with supplies, brought her 15-year-old son, and joined the column heading to Eger. Also among the refugees was a young man named Gergely Bornemisza. He was 22, a clerk in the service of a minor nobleman. He had soft hands, no combat training, and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles when he was anxious, which was often. He'd come to Eger because he had nowhere else to go. When the refugees entered the castle courtyard, Dobbo was there to meet them. He stood on a wooden platform and addressed the crowd, his voice carrying across the assembled mass of frightened, desperate people. "You're safe here. We'll feed you, shelter you, protect you. But I need you to understand something. This castle is going to be besieged. The Ottomans are coming, and when they arrive, nowhere inside these walls will be completely safe. If you want to leave, go now while the roads are still open. But if you stay as part of this garrison. We'll need every hand." Evasisi stepped forward from the crowd. "We'll stay, and we'll fight." Dobbo looked at her, this sharp-eyed woman with dirt on her dress and steel in her voice. "Can you load a musket?" he asked. "Teach me," she replied. Dobbo made a decision that would define the siege. He armed the civilians, not all of them. Children and the elderly were assigned to safer tasks, carrying water, tending the wounded, preparing food. But anyone capable of lifting a weapon was trained to use it. The men were formed into auxiliary units, assigned to repair walls, haul ammunition, reinforce the regular soldiers during assaults. The women were organized into support crews, managing supplies, caring for the injured. But some of the women wanted more. Evasisi approached Dobbo directly. "We're not asking to stand on the front line," she said. "But if the walls are breached, if the soldiers fall, we need to know how to defend ourselves. Give us weapons. Teach us to fight." Dobbo hesitated. It wasn't that he doubted their courage. It was that he'd seen what happened in sieges. He'd seen what the Ottomans did to women captured in fallen cities. Eva didn't flinch. "We know the risks, Captain. We'd rather die fighting than wait to be taken." Dobbo nodded slowly. "All right. Report to the armory at dawn." For the next 2 weeks, Eger transformed. Women learned to load and fire matchlock muskets. They practiced hauling heavy cauldrons of boiling water to the walls. They were taught to recognize the sound of mining beneath the foundations, to watch for siege towers, to stay low when arrows filled the sky. Gergely Bornemisza, the nervous clerk, volunteered to help dig defensive trenches. He'd never done manual labor in his life. His hands blistered and bled. He kept digging. Children were assigned to carry stones to the walls, ammunition for when the defenders ran out of everything else. The elderly prepared bandages, sharpened blades, kept the kitchens running. The castle became a single organism, every person a vital part. Dobbo walked the walls every evening, watching his people work. He saw Evasisi practicing with a musket, her jaw set in concentration. He saw Bornemisza stumbling under the weight of a basket of rubble, refusing help. He saw soldiers teaching farmers how to hold a spear, how to stand in formation, how to trust the man beside you. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not confidence that they would win. He was too experienced for that. But hope that whatever happened, these people would not go quietly. On September 8th, the last refugee column arrived. The gates were sealed. The watchtowers reported movement on the southern horizon. Dobbo stood on the eastern wall looking out at the empty plain and waited. The next morning the horizon turned black. Act 3, the Empire arrives, September 9th, 1552 dawn. The Ottoman army appeared like a flood across the Hungarian plain. First came the cavalry, thousands of Sipahi riders moving in perfect formation, their armor catching the morning sun. Behind them came the infantry, column after column stretching back for miles. And behind them, the siege train, massive bronze cannons pulled by teams of oxen, each gun requiring 50 men with a brass telescope pressed to his eye, counting. He counted units, standards, cannons. He did the arithmetic. 40,000 men, maybe more. Against 2,000. He lowered the telescope. His hands were steady, but his mind was running through calculations. Food stores, ammunition reserves, structural weak points in the walls. How long could they last? Weeks? A month? Behind him, Lieutenant Zolte approached. "Captain, what do we do?" Debo turned to face his young officer. Zolte was trying hard not to sound terrified. Debo put a hand on his shoulder. "We hold," Debo said quietly. "We hold until there's nothing left to hold with. And if they break through, we make them pay for every inch." The Ottoman force that surrounded Eger in September 1552 was commanded by two experienced leaders, Ali Pasha, the Pasha of Buda, and Kara Ahmed Pasha. Ali Pasha had served in multiple campaigns across the empire. He'd participated in sieges in Persia, supervised military operations across the Balkans, administered Ottoman-controlled Hungary from his base in Buda. He was methodical, patient, and accustomed to success. Historical records suggest Ali Pasha didn't initially view Eger as a significant challenge. The fortress was isolated, lightly garrisoned, cut off from reinforcement. Ottoman intelligence estimated fewer than 1,000 soldiers inside. By comparison, Ali Pasha commanded approximately 40,000 troops, including 10,000 janissaries, 15,000 provincial cavalry, and substantial contingents of engineers, sappers, and artillery specialists. Ottoman siege doctrine in this period was highly developed, explains Dr. Agustin. They didn't rush. They systematically isolated the target, destroyed its defenses through bombardment and mining, then overwhelmed it through coordinated assault. The process had been refined over centuries. On September 10th, Ali Pasha sent an envoy to the gates of Eger under a flag of truce. The message was standard Ottoman procedure: surrender the fortress immediately, and the garrison would be granted safe passage. Resist and face total annihilation. István Dobó's response, recorded in contemporary Hungarian chronicles, was brief. "The fortress will not surrender." The envoy returned to the Ottoman camp. Ali Pasha gave the order to begin bombardment. On September 11th, 1552, at approximately 6 in the morning, the Ottoman artillery opened fire. The sound was unlike anything most of the defenders had experienced. The heavy cannons produced a deep, earth-shaking boom that could be heard for miles. The projectiles, massive stone balls weighing up to 300 pounds, screamed through the air and struck the castle walls with devastating force. When a 300-pound stone ball hits a medieval fortification, the impact creates shock waves that radiate through the masonry. Mortar cracks. Stones shift. Entire sections of wall can collapse inward. The Ottomans positioned their heavy guns approximately 800 yards from the castle, just beyond the effective range of Eger's lighter defensive cannons. This allowed them to bombard the walls with relative impunity. The Hungarian guns at Eger were mostly smaller caliber pieces, notes Colonel András Vász, military historian at the Hungarian Defense Forces Military History Institute. Suitable for anti-personnel work, but not for counter-battery fire at that range. Dobó couldn't silence the Ottoman guns. All he could do was absorb the punishment and repair the damage as quickly as possible. The bombardment continued day and night. Ottoman gunners worked in shifts, maintaining a steady rhythm of fire designed to wear down both the fortifications and the defenders' morale. Historical accounts describe the psychological toll. The constant noise made sleep impossible. Dust filled the air. Defenders developed what modern soldiers would recognize as shell shock, a numbed, exhausted state induced by prolonged exposure to artillery fire. But the walls held. Dobó had prepared for this. The earthwork ramparts he'd constructed behind the stone walls absorbed much of the kinetic energy from the cannonballs. When sections of masonry crumbled, work crews immediately filled the gaps with timber, rubble, and packed earth. The Ottomans fired hundreds of rounds in the first week alone. The outer walls showed damage, but no major breaches opened. Ali Pasha adjusted his strategy. If cannons alone wouldn't break the fortress, he would combine bombardment with direct assault. On September 16, 1552, the first major attack began. Act 4. Blood on the walls. Shortly after dawn on September 16th, Ottoman drums began to beat. The sound was rhythmic, relentless, deliberately intimidating. Thousands of janissaries assembled in formation outside the castle walls, organized into attack columns. They carried scaling ladders, long wooden structures designed to hook onto the top of battlements. They wore minimal armor, padded tunics, small round shields, helmets favoring mobility over protection. They were armed with scimitars, daggers, and matchlock muskets. According to Gergely Bornemissa's eyewitness account, written after the siege, the janissaries advanced in near silence except for the drums. No war cries, no shouting. Just thousands of men moving forward in disciplined lines. This was psychological warfare, says Dr. Finkel. The silence was more terrifying than screaming. It demonstrated discipline, confidence, inevitability. The message was clear: you cannot stop this. The Hungarian defenders waited on the walls, matchlocks loaded, cannons primed with grapeshot. István Dobó reportedly gave the order to hold fire until the attackers were within 50 yards. When the janissaries reached that distance, the walls erupted. Eger's cannons fired simultaneously, loaded with anti-personnel rounds, canvas bags filled with dozens of iron balls that scattered like lethal hail. Muskets cracked in ragged volleys. Crossbowmen released bolts. The front ranks of the Ottoman assault collapsed. Bodies crumpled. Men fell screaming. But the soldiers behind them kept coming. Janissary tactics relied on accepting casualties to close the distance, explains Colonel Vass. They knew the first wave would be decimated, but if enough men reached the walls, they could establish a foothold. Reached the base of the walls and threw up their ladders. Dozens of ladders slammed against the stone battlements. Soldiers began climbing. The Hungarian defenders met them at the top. Medieval siege warfare, particularly fighting on ladders and walls, was brutal in ways modern warfare is not. When a janissary reached the top of a ladder, he had to pull himself over the parapet, while Hungarian defenders thrust spears at his face, swung axes at his hands, or simply pushed the ladder backward. Men fell screaming. Ladders toppled, carrying multiple soldiers down with them. Bodies began to pile at the base of the walls, but the janissaries kept climbing. Historical records indicate that women played a direct combat role during this assault. Groups of civilian women, organized by Eva Sisi, hauled heavy cauldrons of boiling water to the ramparts. When Ottoman soldiers clustered at the base of ladders or tried to force their way through arrow slits, the women poured the scalding liquid down on them. The effect was devastating. Boiling water causes immediate agonizing burns. Soldiers hit by it would drop their weapons, stumble, fall. Those who survived were often blinded or so badly burned they couldn't continue fighting. The use of boiling liquids in siege defense was common in this period, notes Dr. Agustin. What made Eger unusual was the scale and organization. Dobó had stockpiled enormous quantities of water, oil, and rendered animal fats specifically for this purpose. And he trained civilians, including women, to deliver it under fire. The assault lasted approximately 4 hours. Wave after wave of janissaries charged the walls. Wave after wave was repulsed. By mid-morning, the base of Eger's eastern wall was littered with hundreds of Ottoman dead and wounded. Ali Pasha called off the attack. The janissaries retreated in good order, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead where they lay. On the walls, Hungarian defenders stared at the carnage below. They had held, but the cost was becoming apparent. Casualty reports indicated 47 defenders killed, 80 wounded. For a garrison that started with only 800 soldiers, those were unsustainable losses. And everyone knew this was just the beginning. That night, Dobó walked the walls, speaking quietly to his soldiers, checking on the wounded, assessing damage. According to Bornemissa, Dobó told his officers, "Today, we learned they can be stopped. Tomorrow, we prove we can do it again." But Ali Pasha was already adapting. If direct assault wouldn't work, he would go under the walls instead of over them. Act 5, the war beneath the ground. Mining was one of the most feared siege tactics of the 16th century. The process was methodical and terrifying. Ottoman engineers would select a section of wall, then begin digging a tunnel toward it from a position outside the defenders' musket range. The tunnel would be shored up with wooden beams as it advanced, preventing cave-ins. Once the tunnel reached the foundation of the wall, the miners would excavate a large chamber directly beneath the masonry. They would pack this chamber with barrels of gunpowder, lay a slow-burning fuse, and retreat. When the powder exploded, the foundation would collapse, bringing down the wall above it. Mining was incredibly effective against medieval fortifications, says Dr. Peter. Stone walls are strong against vertical loads. They can support enormous weight, but they're vulnerable to having their foundations removed. Once the ground beneath them gives way, they pancake. The challenge for defenders was detection and response. Debeau employed a technique that had been used since ancient times: water-filled bowls placed on the ground inside the castle. When Ottoman miners dug beneath the walls, the vibrations would cause ripples in the water. Observers watched these bowls constantly. When ripples appeared, they could estimate the approximate location of the enemy tunnel. The counter-tactic was called countermining. Dig your own tunnel toward the enemy mine, break through, and either collapse it or fight the miners underground. It was claustrophobic, terrifying work. In late September, Hungarian observers detected mining activity beneath the eastern bastion. Debeau ordered countermining teams to deploy. Gergely Bornemisza volunteered for one of these teams. Countermining operations were carried out by small teams, usually 4 to 6 men, working in shifts. They dug through earth and rock using picks, shovels, and their hands. The tunnels were barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Timber beams were placed every few feet to prevent cave-ins. The only light came from oil lamps, which consumed precious oxygen in the confined space. The air was thick, hot, difficult to breathe. Men worked in near total darkness, listening for sounds of enemy digging on the other side of the earth. According to historical accounts, Bornemisza's team broke into an Ottoman tunnel on September 24th. What followed was close-quarters combat in conditions almost impossible to imagine. The tunnels were too narrow to swing a sword. Men fought with daggers, picks, and their hands. There was no room to maneuver, no retreat. It was kill or be killed in absolute darkness, breathing air thick with dust and smoke. Bornemisza's account describes the encounter in sparse, traumatized language. He wrote that the fighting lasted only minutes, but felt like hours. Men screamed. Someone's lamp fell and went out. He stabbed a man he couldn't see, felt the body go limp, and kept stabbing until he was certain the threat was dead. The Hungarians managed to drive the Ottoman miners back, then packed the enemy tunnel with barrels of rubble and collapsed it using a small explosive charge. The blast shook the entire castle. Dust shot up through cracks in the courtyard. For a moment, everyone feared the walls were coming down. But when the dust cleared, the eastern bastion still stood. The Ottoman mine had been neutralized. Bornemisza emerged from the tunnel covered in mud and blood, temporarily deaf from the explosion, shaking uncontrollably. Eva Sese, who had been organizing women to haul rubble for the countermining operations, found him sitting against a wall, staring at nothing. She brought him water and sat beside him in silence. No words were necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, Ottoman engineers attempted 4 more mining operations. Each time, Hungarian counterminers detected and neutralized them. But the strain was beginning to show. The garrison was running low on gunpowder. Food rations had been cut. Casualties continued to mount. Ali Pasha, meanwhile, was growing frustrated. 3 weeks into the siege, Eger still stood. He ordered another major assault, this time with everything he had. Act 6. The Fire Women. By early October, the siege had settled into a brutal routine. Daily mining and countermining, constant attrition. Supplies inside Eger were dwindling. Gunpowder reserves were down to 1/3 of their original stockpile. Food rations had been reduced to subsistence levels. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. The wounded filled the castle's chapel, which had been converted into a makeshift hospital. Civilian women tended injuries with limited bandages, no anesthesia, nothing but prayer for infection. Morale remained high, but everyone understood the arithmetic. Every casualty weakened the defense. Every spent barrel of gunpowder brought them closer to helplessness. On October 3rd, the Ottomans launched their largest assault yet. This time, Ali Pasha committed nearly 15,000 troops simultaneously, attacking multiple sections of the wall at once to spread the defenders thin. The assault began at dawn with an intensified bombardment. Ottoman cannons fired for 2 hours straight, concentrating on the eastern and southern walls. Then the drums began. Thousands of janissaries advanced, carrying ladders, shields locked overhead to protect against arrow fire. They were supported by provincial troops, Anatolian infantry armed with pikes and swords, who surged forward in a human wave designed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. The Hungarian garrison was stretched to the breaking point. Dobrow had approximately 500 able-bodied soldiers left. He deployed them along 600 yards of wall. The math was impossible, so the civilians stepped in. Historical sources, particularly Bornemissa's account, are explicit about the role women played during the October 3rd assault. Groups of women led by Eger formed fire teams. They heated massive cauldrons of water, oil, and animal fat to boiling temperatures, then carried them, often under direct enemy fire, to sections of the wall where Ottoman troops were attempting to scale. When janissaries reached the top of their ladders, the women poured the boiling liquid directly onto them. The results were horrific. Men fell screaming, their skin peeling off. Those who survived were often blinded or so badly burned they went into shock. But the tactic worked. It broke assault after assault. The women of Eger weren't just supporting the defense, says Dr. Peter. They were combatants. They were killing enemy soldiers, and they were doing it at enormous personal risk. Ottoman archers specifically targeted them once they realized what was happening. One recorded incident describes a woman whose name wasn't preserved, who was struck by an arrow while carrying a cauldron to the wall. She fell, spilling the boiling oil, which severely burned 2 other women nearby. All 3 died within hours, but the attacks continued. Another documented event involves a woman who was grabbed by a janissary who had reached the top of the wall. According to accounts, he tried to pull her over the parapet as he fell backward off his ladder. She went over the edge and fell 30 feet to her death on the rocks below. The brutality was total. There were no safe positions. No one was exempt from danger. By midday, the eastern wall was slick with blood, oil, and debris. Bodies, Ottoman and Hungarian alike, lay piled at the base. The air reeked of gunpowder, burning flesh and death, but the walls held. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, Ali Pasha called off the assault. The Ottomans had suffered massive casualties. Estimates suggest over 2,000 killed or wounded in a single day. Eger's losses were also severe. 93 defenders dead, over 100 wounded. That night, Eva Sisi sat alone on the steps of the chapel, staring at her hands. They were badly burned from handling hot cauldrons. The skin was blistered and peeling. According to Bornemissa, she wept. Not from pain, but from exhaustion and the weight of what she had done and seen. Dobrow found her there. He said nothing. He simply sat beside her. After a long silence, Sisi reportedly asked, "How much longer can we last?" Dobrow's response, as recorded by Bornemissa, "As long as we must." But privately, Dobrow knew the truth. Eger was running out of time. 87. The art of deception. By mid-October, István Dobrow faced a critical problem. His garrison was exhausted. Ammunition was running critically low. Food supplies were nearly depleted. The Ottoman bombardment had created multiple weak points in the walls that couldn't be fully repaired. He couldn't win through strength. The Ottomans still outnumbered him 20-1, but he could win through deception. Dobrow ordered a series of carefully orchestrated measures designed to convince the Ottomans that Eger was stronger than it actually was. First, he had his soldiers conduct false troop movements at night. Small groups of men would march past torches in repetitive loops, creating the illusion of reinforcements arriving from the north. Second, he ordered all remaining cannons to fire coordinated volleys at regular intervals throughout the night, not at specific targets, but simply to make noise and create the impression of a well-supplied arsenal. Third, he had the garrison sing, loudly, war hymns, folk songs, anything that projected confidence and defiance. The singing could be heard across the valley, reaching the Ottoman camp. This was psychological operations in the 16th century, says Dr. Agustin. De Boer understood that Ali Pasha was making decisions based on intelligence reports and observations. If he could manipulate those observations, he could influence Ottoman decision-making. The strategy worked. Ottoman scouts reported back to Ali Pasha that the fortress appeared to have received reinforcements. The volume of cannon fire suggested adequate supplies. The singing indicated high morale. By late October, Ali Pasha was facing his own crisis. The siege had dragged on for over a month. He had lost thousands of men. His supply lines were stretched. Winter was approaching, and campaigning in the Hungarian highlands during winter was a logistical nightmare. Moreover, his reputation was that Eger would fall quickly. Instead, it had become a protracted, costly stalemate. Ottoman military records preserved in archives in Istanbul indicate that Ali Pasha sent dispatches back to Constantinople requesting additional troops and supplies. But he also knew that reinforcements would take weeks to arrive, and every day the siege continued, his position weakened. There was another factor: Hungarian relief forces. Throughout October, there were persistent rumors that a Hungarian relief army was being assembled in the north. Ottoman scouts reported troop movements. Cavalry patrols clashed with Hungarian outriders. The rumors were partly true. King Ferdinand had authorized the formation of a relief column, but internal political disputes and lack of funds had delayed its departure. By mid-October, the relief force still hadn't left Bratislava. But Ali Pasha didn't know that. From his perspective, he was potentially facing a two-front battle, the stubborn fortress in front of him and a relief army approaching from behind. On October 12th, he made a decision, one final overwhelming assault. Commit every available soldier. If Eger fell, the campaign would be salvaged. If it didn't, he would withdraw before winter and before any relief force could arrive. The date was set, October 17th, 1552, Act 8, the final assault, 39 days that changed Europe. Every soldier in the Ottoman camp knew it. Every defender on Eger's walls knew it. This would be the decisive battle. In Eger, Hungarian scouts observed the preparations, the massing of troops, the stockpiling of ladders and siege equipment, the movement of artillery into closer positions. De Boer called his officers together and told them the truth. The next assault will be total. The Ottomans will throw everything at the walls. If the defense breaks anywhere, the castle will fall. He gave his final orders. Every able-bodied person, soldier or civilian, man or woman, would fight. There would be no reserves, no fallback positions. Hold the walls or die trying. On the night of October 16th, the defenders of Eger prepared for the end. October 17th, 1552, dawn. The Ottoman bombardment began at first light and was unlike anything that had come before. Every cannon in the siege train fired simultaneously. The noise was continuous, overwhelming, a physical force that made the ground shake and the air vibrate. For 2 hours, the cannons pounded the walls without pause. Sections of the eastern wall collapsed. The southern bastion cracked along its foundation. Dust and smoke filled the air so thickly that visibility dropped to a few yards. Then suddenly the cannon stopped. In the silence that followed, the drums began. According to multiple historical accounts, approximately 25,000 Ottoman troops attacked Eger simultaneously on the morning of October 17th. The assault came from all sides. Janissaries stormed the eastern wall. Provincial infantry attacked the south. Cavalry dismounted and advanced on the western gates with battering rams. It was total war. The defenders met them with everything they had left. Cannons loaded with grape shot fired point-blank into the massed troops. Musketeers fired, reloaded, fired again, until their barrels were too hot to touch. Women hurled stones, poured boiling oil, swung improvised weapons at anyone who reached the top of the walls. The fighting was savage and chaotic. Ottoman soldiers breached the outer wall in 3 locations. Janissaries poured through, clashing with Hungarian defenders in hand-to-hand combat in the narrow courtyards. Dubois personally led a counterattack into the largest breach. Armed with a sword and accompanied by approximately 50 soldiers, he charged directly into the mass of janissaries attempting to secure the gap. Contemporary accounts describe Dubois fighting with desperate fury, cutting down multiple opponents, rallying his men by sheer force of will. The counterattack succeeded in clearing the breach temporarily, but at enormous cost. Half of Dubois' men were killed or wounded in the melee. By mid-morning, the defense was collapsing. Ottoman troops held positions inside the outer courtyard. The southern bastion was on the verge of falling. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Casualties were catastrophic. Gergely Bornemissa's account describes this moment as the point when everyone believed the end had come. But then something unexpected happened. The Ottoman assault began to lose momentum. After 4 hours of continuous fighting, even the disciplined janissaries were exhausted. They had taken massive casualties. The bodies of their comrades filled the breaches and courtyards. Every step forward cost dozens of lives, and the Hungarians refused to break. No matter how many times the Ottomans pushed forward, they met resistance. No matter how many defenders fell, others took their place. What happened at Eger during that final assault is almost inexplicable from a military standpoint, says Colonel Voss. By all rational calculation, the defense should have collapsed. But morale, leadership, and sheer willpower kept it intact just long enough for the Ottoman attack to exhaust itself. Around noon, Ali Pasha ordered a temporary withdrawal to regroup. The Ottomans pulled back, dragging their wounded with them. The defenders used the pause to frantically rebuild barricades using corpses, furniture, rubble, anything available. 2 hours later, the Ottomans attacked again. This time, the assault was less coordinated, less disciplined. The troops were tired. Their officers struggled to maintain formation. The defense held. By late afternoon, the Ottoman attacks had devolved into sporadic, disorganized charges that were repulsed with relative ease. At sunset, Ali Pasha called off the assault entirely. The Ottomans retreated to their camp. On the walls of Eger, the defenders stood among the dead and dying, too exhausted to cheer, too numb to feel relief. They had survived. Barely. The night of October 17th was quiet. No bombardment, no drums, just silence. Inside Eger, the survivors counted their losses. Of the original 800 soldiers, fewer than 300 remained combat effective. Over 200 civilians had been killed. The wounded filled every available space. The castle was a ruin. The courtyards were filled with debris and corpses, but the fortress had not fallen. Over the next 2 days, Hungarian scouts observed activity in the Ottoman camp. Tents were being struck. Wagons were being loaded. Troops were forming into marching columns. On October 18th, the impossible became reality. The Ottoman army withdrew. Ali Pasha, facing unsustainable losses, dwindling supplies, approaching winter and reports of a potential relief force, made the decision to lift the siege. 40,000 troops marched south, leaving behind their dead and their failure. On the morning of October 19th, lookouts on Eger's walls confirmed what seemed unbelievable. The Ottomans were gone. The siege was over. Eger had held. On the evening of October 17th, Ali Pasha sat in his command tent and confronted a reality no Ottoman commander wanted to face. He had lost, not in a single catastrophic battle, but through slow, grinding attrition against an opponent that refused to accept the inevitable. The casualty reports were devastating. Ottoman losses during the siege are estimated at between 8,000 and 10,000 men, killed or wounded. The October 17th assault alone had cost roughly 2,000 casualties. These weren't just numbers. They were janissaries, elite troops that took years to train and couldn't be easily replaced. They were experienced soldiers, siege engineers, artillerymen. For the Ottoman military system, losing 10,000 men wasn't strategically crippling, explains Dr. Agustin. The empire could absorb those losses, but losing them for nothing, failing to take a minor fortress, that was a political and psychological disaster. Ali Pasha's supply situation was equally dire. The siege train had expended enormous quantities of gunpowder. Food supplies for 40,000 men, even with regular resupply caravans, were running low, and winter was approaching. There was also the persistent threat of Hungarian relief forces. While Ali Pasha's scouts hadn't confirmed the arrival of a major relief army, reports indicated troop movements to the north. The possibility of being caught between a fortified position and a field army was a scenario no commander wanted. On October 18th, Ali Pasha convened his senior officers. Ottoman military records preserved in the Topkapı Palace archives in Istanbul include references to this council. While the exact details of the discussion aren't recorded, the outcome is clear. Ali Pasha ordered a general withdrawal. Retreating from Eger was a humiliation, says Dr. Finkel, not just for Ali Pasha personally, but for the Ottoman military establishment. They had thrown overwhelming force at a minor fortress and been defeated by a garrison that, on paper, shouldn't have lasted a week. The withdrawal began immediately. Ottoman engineers dismantled the siege works. Artillery pieces were loaded onto wagons. Tents were struck. The camp that had sprawled across the valley for over a month disappeared within 2 days. By the morning of October 19th, the Ottoman army was in full retreat southward, leaving behind burned siege equipment they couldn't transport, mass graves for their dead, and the fortress they had failed to conquer. October 19th, 1552, dawned cold and grey over Eger Castle. The defenders woke to silence. No cannon fire, no drums, no shouted orders from the Ottoman lines. For men and women who had lived under constant bombardment for 39 days, the silence was disorienting. Scouts were sent out cautiously, expecting ambush or trickery. What they found was an abandoned battlefield. The Ottoman camp was gone. Only debris remained, broken ladders, discarded equipment, trampled earth where thousands of tents had stood. The message was relayed back to the castle. The siege was over. The Ottomans had withdrawn. Historical accounts describe the moment when this realization spread through the garrison. There was no immediate celebration, no cheering. The survivors were too exhausted, too traumatized, too overwhelmed. Gergely Bornemissa wrote that many people simply collapsed where they stood and wept, not from joy, but from the sudden release of unbearable tension. Eva Sisi reportedly climbed to the highest point of the eastern wall, looked out at the empty plain where the Ottoman army had been, and sank to her knees. She stayed there for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, trying to process that she had survived. Istvan Dobo walked the walls that morning, accompanied by his remaining officers. He surveyed the damage. Shattered fortifications, collapsed buildings, courtyards filled with rubble and blood. According to later accounts, Dobo said very little. He simply walked, observed, and occasionally stopped to speak quietly with soldiers or civilians. Dobo understood that survival wasn't the same as victory, notes Dr. Peter. Yes, they had held the fortress, but the cost was almost unbearable, and he carried the weight of every life lost under his command. By midday, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. Eger, a minor fortress with 2,000 defenders, had withstood a siege by 40,000 Ottoman troops. They had done what everyone said was impossible, and the news was about to spread across Europe. Agreed 10, the price and the legacy. The immediate aftermath of the siege was grim work. The first task was caring for the wounded. Over 300 people required medical attention, soldiers and civilians alike, suffering from everything from musket wounds to burns to injuries from falling masonry. The castle's makeshift hospital was overwhelmed. Civilian women, many of whom had no medical training before the siege, worked around the clock cleaning wounds, setting broken bones, trying to prevent infection with limited supplies. Many of the wounded died in the days following the siege. Without antibiotics or modern surgical techniques, even relatively minor injuries could become fatal. Infections set in. Fever spiked. People who had survived weeks of combat died in the supposed safety of the hospital. The second task was burying the dead. Final casualty figures are difficult to establish with precision, but historical sources provide estimates. Of the original 800 soldiers in the garrison, approximately 400 were killed during the siege. Another 200 were wounded, many seriously enough that they would never return to active service. Civilian casualties were equally severe. Estimates suggest that between 200 and 300 civilians died, killed by cannon fire during assaults or from disease and privation during the siege. In total, Eger lost roughly one-third of its population. Mass graves were dug outside the castle walls. Christian burial rites were performed over hundreds of bodies at once. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses.